Okay.
So the speaker for today's session, CA Vishal Gada, the chairman of the Ahmedabad branch, CA Harit Dhariwal, coordinators for today's session, CA Meenal Booch and CA Keshav Maheshwari, and participants. Wish you all a very good evening and welcome to today's session on Am I audible just now?
No, Manisha Ben, you are not audible.
Okay.
So you can switch off your video and speak like so that it's okay.
I think I'll do that. So the speaker for today's session, CA Vishal Gada, the chairman of the Ahmedabad branch, CA Harit Dhariwal, the coordinators for today's session, CA Meenal Pooch and CA Keshav Maheshwari, participants, and wish you all a very good evening and welcome to today's session that is going to be taken by CA Vishal Gada on the topic of ECB. Vishal is, before I start, I guess I forgot the ICI motto. Let us start with the ICI motto.
य एष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति य एष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति कामं 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 कामपुरुषो पुरुषो निर्मिमाणः निर्मिमाणः तदेव शुक्रं तद्ब्रह्मा तद्ब्रह्मा तदेवामृतमुच्यते अस्मिन् लोकः आश्रितः सर्वे तदूनात्यपि कश्चनात्यपि कश्चन एतद्वैता 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 एतद्वैता.
So now over to the chairman of our Ahmedabad branch, CA Harit Dhariwal, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Manisha Ben. Very respected faculty for today's session, CA Vishal Gada. The coordinators, Meenal Ben, Manisha Ben, Keshav, and all the participants, a very good evening to all of you. I'll just take a couple of your minutes for the update of the Ahmedabad branch since my last address. We are having a very interesting session on 18th. As I said, economic laws offenses. We have something on the Benami, PMLA, and the Black Money Act, and its interplay with Income Tax Act on 18th of this month. It's an event with WIRC, 3 to 7:30 p.m. in the evening we have on Saturday. And yes, our CA marathon, we have got more than 450 registrations now, and very happy to see such overwhelming response. And the marathon, even all the members are going to meet every day in the morning from tomorrow at Riverfront to practice for that. So thank you for all their support. And yes, on 25th and 26th, they're having a national CA student conference. So all those who are, please, all the members here should definitely encourage their articles to be a part of this conference, and not only as a volunteers, but also as paper presenters. As far as the technical events are concerned at Ahmedabad branch, we are having a lot of virtual sessions now. Tomorrow on 14th, we are having a session on the IBC. 15th, we are having a session on the startup. On 16th, we are having a session on the audit quality maturity model. On 20th of this month, we are having a session on the CSR. And you're also coming up with a special 2-day series on transfer pricing as well. With this, I would once again, again urge all of you as participants of this workshop of FEMA that thank you for your active involvement in this series. And even if anybody would want to still enroll, we have a lot of days to go. We can still have them on board. We are also having our parallel GST batch going on at branch. So all those who want to physically attend the sessions, we are having a GST batch till 17th of this month. So yes, these are the main events which are lined up. And I would once again thank CA Vishal Gada for accepting our invitation. Sir is, a kind of you can say a multi-talented player. He can speak on income tax, on FEMA, on GST. So I think GST also now, but on any topic. And he's always been a great support to Ahmedabad branch. So thank you, Vishal Bhai, for always being there. And we look forward to attending today's session. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Harit. Thanks a lot, to the Ahmedabad branch for inviting me. Should I share my screen?
Sir, I would request if Minal is going to introduce you. I think you just have a quick introduction of
yeah,
sir.
Yeah.
You don't require it, sir, now, but still, as a formality, we'll just have it a quick glance.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So Manisha, I'm just taking over here. Okay. So as rightly said by Harit Bhai, Vishal needs no introduction. But yes, I'm doing that formality. Good evening and a very warm welcome, CA Vishal Gada. It gives me great pleasure to introduce a very dynamic and eminent faculty, CA Vishal Gada, who is currently a founder and mentor of Orthus Consulting. Vishal has over 20 years of experience in advising clients on tax and regulatory domain. Prior to founding Orthus Consulting, he was a partner at KPMG and also one of the co-founders of Dhruva Advisors. Vishal has also featured in the list of top tax professionals in India in the survey conducted by the International Tax Review. He's also a qualified chartered accountant and has completed the business consultancy studies course conducted by Jamnalal Bajaj Institute of Management Studies jointly with Bombay Chartered Accountant Society. He also holds a bachelor's degree in law. He's also worked on numerous complex M&A transactions, corporate reorganizations, and regulatory issues. His areas of expertise also includes devising succession structures, advising on domestic and international tax issues, and structures for inbound and outbound investments. Vishal also has co-authored a couple of books on professional subjects and is a regular speaker at various professional forums. He's also been part of various professional committees, namely International Tax Committee of Bombay Chartered Accountant Society and Chamber of Tax Consultants, as well as Research and Publication Committee of WRC of IRCAI. He's also an avid reader, art lover, a music enthusiast, and writes regularly on social blogs. He's a multifaceted personality. Vishal, we are honored to have you with us. Looking forward to learn about ECB from you. Friends, let's have a huge round of applause to welcome Vishal.
Yeah, thanks, Minal.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. I'll just share my screen, and what I understand is there is already a session which has been concluded on the ECB foreign currency. So what I would be covering is ECB Indian currency, a bit about trade credits, and I think a larger part of my presentation would be on case studies, some actual queries which come in on a regular basis. And those case studies, I will also cover the ECB foreign currency. So I think that's the topics given to me. So with that, let me quickly go to the slide deck on the regulatory framework. Earlier, there were different regulations for different parts of ECB. So you had FEMA, borrowing and lending in foreign exchange, which dealt with ECB in respect of foreign currency, and you had a separate FEMA, borrowing and lending in Indian rupees, which dealt with ECB in Indian rupees. And there were also certain offshoots of ECBs such as FCCB, etc., which was covered under a separate outbound investment regulation, the regulation 21. All these regulations are now kind of consolidated in a single regulation under notification FEMA 3 capital R. We just now call it FEMA 3R, for convenience sake. So it's now a single foreign exchange management, borrowing and lending regulations, which now cover the rupee ECB, the foreign currency ECB, the trade credits, etc. And then under this, you also have what you call a master direction. For example, the last master direction was issued in March 2019, which keeps on getting updated by virtue of various APDIR circulars. So you obviously have to read the regulations along with the master directions, along with the APDIR circulars, and obviously the RBI FAQs, which RBI keeps on updating on a very regular basis. There are also a couple of FAQs which I have covered at the end of the presentation on certain dicey issues. As I earlier mentioned, the current foreign exchange management, borrowing and lending regulations, which is basically notification 3 R, it covers the foreign currency denominated ECB and it covers the rupee denominated ECB. I'm only going to cover the rupee denominated ECB today. So let's look at certain basics around it. The first, obviously, is that the currency is Indian rupee. The second is what is the form of ECB? The form of ECB is a simpliciter loan, a bank loan. It could be notes, bonds, debentures, and preference shares, provided these debentures and preference shares are not fully and compulsorily convertible instruments. Moment you have a fully convertible debenture, a fully convertible preference share, then you will not cover it under ECB. You will basically cover it under FDI, because a CCD or a CCPS basically would get covered under the FDI regulation. Any trade credit beyond 3 years, interestingly, are also covered under the ECB regulations. I think earlier it was trade credit beyond 5 years, and then there was some amendment around it. So now any trade credit beyond 3 years, you will basically deem it to be an ECB. What is a trade credit? We'll take it up, including a couple of examples. Any financial lease is regarded as an ECB, and even certain structured instruments such as a plain vanilla rupee denominated bonds which are issued overseas, they might be privately placed or they might be listed. These are again regarded as ECB. So these are some forms in which somebody can raise a rupee denominated external commercial borrowing. Now, who are the eligible borrowers? As you were aware, in the context of foreign currency denominated ECBs, the eligible borrowers were all entities which are eligible to receive FDI. And then there were certain 4 categories of special entities, such as port trusts, units in SEZ, SIDBI, and Exim Bank of India. In context of rupee denominated ECB, there is an additional list which has been added, which is basically registered entities engaged in microfinance activities. These are typically registered not-for-profit companies, registered societies, cooperatives, and other non-government organizations. So you would basically see that the eligible borrower list is slightly wider for the rupee denominated ECB compared to a foreign currency denominated ECB. In terms of recognized lenders, they are basically the same. It's a single list applicable to a foreign currency denominated ECB versus a rupee ECB. Just for sake of repetition, we'll just go through it. So it's very important that the lender is a resident of a FATF compliant country. There is a global organization called Financial Action Task Force. Every year, Financial Action Task Force will come up with certain countries which are blacklisted. And if these are blacklisted, you cannot really borrow from any lenders which are residing in those countries. Along with FATF, you also have a IOSCO organization, which basically serves the same purpose. Which means whenever you look at certain odd country, you will go and check the website of FATF and website of IOSCO, just to ensure that these countries do not appear in the negative list. This list keeps on changing. You also have certain other recognized lenders. One is obviously a multilateral and regional financial institutions where India is a member country. It could be like the World Bank, etc. And individuals, if they are foreign equity holders, uh, uh, which means if, let's say, you have an individual which holds more than X percentage in an Indian company, even that individual could be regarded as a recognized lender. And in addition to individual, any other foreign equity holder which hold either 25% directly or they hold 51% indirectly in the Indian company, they also get covered in the recognized lender. We have actually a couple of case studies on this recognized lender. We'll come to some very interesting scenarios on this aspect. It is important that any ECB, any external commercial borrowing that is availed, complies with the minimum average maturity period. What this typically means is that you cannot repay the ECBs at a shorter tenure. And one of the logic is that the government is concerned with hot money. So they don't allow, for example, a 6-month ECB, because it means that large chunks of money come into India and then they go out of India, which kinds of destabilizes the financial system. So that's one of the fundamental reason why Reserve Bank is always concerned about a minimum average maturity period. As a thumb rule, you will have a 3-year minimum average maturity period, but then there are certain special categories. For example, if you are a manufacturing company in India and you want to raise an ECB, not beyond 50 million. So it could be 10, 20, 30, 40, let's say max $50 million. Then the MAMP is just 1 year. So that's a great benefit given to the manufacturing company. Can you have a repayment period beyond 1 year? Absolutely, that's perfectly fine. But you cannot have a repayment period where the average maturity is below 12 months. So that's about the manufacturing companies. The second is, if let's say you are raising ECBs from foreign equity holder, and this is for the working capital purpose, general corporate purpose, or repayment of any rupee loans, then the MAMP has to be a minimum of 5 years. Earlier, you were just not allowed to raise ECBs for the purpose of working capital purpose or any general corporate purpose. In the last regulations which came in Capital 3R, the government has allowed it, but there are two conditions. One is you cannot avail this ECB from any lender. It has to be your own foreign equity holder. And as we have discussed earlier, this foreign equity holder should be holding at least 25% directly. And if it is not holding any direct shareholding, then it should hold at least 51% indirectly. And only then this foreign equity holder would be an eligible lender. And now you can borrow an ECB for working capital purpose, general corporate purpose, etc. The only thing is your MAMP has to be a larger period. So you cannot repay the rupee loan very quickly. You can also raise ECB from any other lender for working capital purpose or general corporate purpose. However, in that case, the MEMP has been doubled. So you then cannot repay this loan in such a manner where your average maturity is below 10 years. Also, if there are NBFCs which are availing such ECBs for on-lending purpose, obviously because that's their business, then they can also raise such ECB for on-lending purpose. But again, the minimum average maturity period is 10 years. You also can raise ECBs for repayment of rupee loans, which you have availed in the past for capital expenditure. Let's say I'm an Indian company, I borrowed from an Indian NBFC or an Indian bank. I utilize that amount to create a capex. Let's say I bought some machinery or I set up a plant. I can still raise an ECB to repay those loans. But again, I need to have an MAMP of 7 years. The same criteria applies for NBFCs. So for example, in the earlier point, an NBFCs could raise money for on lending, but where the MAMP is 10 years. But if NBFCs demonstrate that they are raising money for on lending, and this on lending is for the purpose of repayment of rupee loans by Indian borrowers who have availed that Indian loans for capex purpose, then the NBFC gets a benefit and the MAMP is actually reduced to 7 years. You then have the other categories where ECB is raised for general repayment of rupee loans other than capex. You have a longer period, which is 10 years. So also is the case with NBFC. So you would see that while the thumb rule is that MAMP is 3 years, moment you are availing loan for working capital purpose, general corporate purpose, for making a repayment of the rupee loan, the government, the Reserve Bank is enlarging the MAMP, to 10 years. And then there are certain concessions available. For example, if you're raising such loan from foreign equity holder, then the government is saying, okay, let's reduce it to 5 years. If really you're raising it from other than a foreign equity holder, but this is for the purpose of repayment of rupee loan, let's say availed for for capital expenditure, then again, the government is saying, let's reduce it for 7 years. So these MAMPs generally we have seen, you do not get any specific approval to relax this period, even if you tried. Couple of times in the past, we had gone to Reserve Bank and Reserve Bank said, sorry, these are, cast in stone. We would not like to deviate from these MAMPs at all. You also have an all-in cost ceiling per annum. For example, in the context of rupee denominated ECBs, the all-in cost ceiling is the benchmark rate, which is prevailing on the Government of India securities of the corresponding period, plus a 4.5% spread, which is 450 BPS spread. So I'll give an example. Let's say you take a ECB for 5 years. The question is, what is the maximum interest and other cost you can incur on that? You have to compare the 5-year Government of India tenure securities, which is prevailing. And let's say at that time, the government is basically paying 3%. Then the maximum you can pay is 3% plus 4.5%, which is 7.5%. So this is your all-in cost ceiling. We will take a couple of case studies and FAQs on what this all-in cost includes. And subject to what we discussed earlier about working capital purpose, general corporate purpose, repayment of rupee loans, on lending, there are certain areas for which you cannot borrow ECBs. For example, you cannot borrow ECBs for the purpose of real estate activities. You cannot borrow ECBs for the purpose of investment in capital market. And you cannot even borrow ECBs for the purpose of equity investment, which is interesting. Which means if I avail a ECB, I cannot infuse that money into my subsidiary. Even that is prohibited. There was a bit of an issue that if equity investment is prohibited, does it mean that I cannot even make equity investment in my overseas subsidiary under the overseas direct investment route? But you now have an RBI FAQ which says that no, we are perfectly fine if you make a overseas investment, if you infuse into the equity of your foreign subsidiary. This restriction applies only to domestic investment. So I think that's a welcome clarification. We'll also look at this real estate activity definition. It is pretty wide. And while we'll take up one case study, why don't I, for a moment, project this definition? Yes. So if you look at the real estate definition for the purposes of ECB, they are saying any real estate activity involving own or leased property for buying, selling, and renting of commercial and residential properties or land, and also includes activities either on a fee or contract basis, assigning real estate agents for intermediating in buying, selling, letting, or managing real estate. However, this would not include construction or development of industrial parks, integrated townships, SEZ. This will also not include purchase of industrial land as part of, let's say, setting up some kind of a factory, some kind of a unit, and any activity under the infrastructure sector definition. So in some sense, this is pretty wide, So let's say I want to buy a land and I want to build a corporate house over that land. It is prohibited because buying of a land is not possible, and constructing a corporate house does not fall under any of the three exceptions which they have given. But if you look at the real estate definition, which is there under, for instance, the FDI regime, it's pretty narrow. It excludes leasing, it excludes renting out of real estate, it excludes construction of residential premise, it excludes construction of commercial premise, but that is not a definition which is applicable here. So you would generally see that lot of things from a real estate perspective are debarred under the ECB route as compared to other regulations. So with this, why don't we go back to the earlier slide deck? Yes. So this is it. And working capital, general corporate purpose, repayment of rupee loan, on lending, these are permitted only to the extent we have discussed earlier, subject to the eligible lender and subject to the MAMP criteria. But the three most important restriction is real estate activity, equity investment, where I obviously can do an overseas equity investment under my subsidiary under the ODI route, and obviously investment in capital market. Let's talk a bit on hedging. The regulations do permit overseas investors, to hedge their exposure, because what happens, an overseas investor would really borrow in foreign currency elsewhere, and they would be lending in rupee. So the question is, can they, via certain banks in India, invest in certain derivative products to hedge their exposure? That is something which the ECB regulation is permitting. And the foreign investor can also access the domestic market in India through the branches and subsidiaries of Indian banks abroad, or branches of foreign banks with India on a back-to-back basis. So let's say I am a lender sitting in Dubai. I have lent a rupee ECB to a company in India, and I obviously want to hedge it. Can I approach the Dubai branch of SBI, to hedge my loan? Answer is yes. That's absolutely permitted. There are certain other costs which are permitted over and above the all-in cost ceiling, and this is primarily a prepayment charge or a penal interest. So subject to a borrower in India satisfying the minimum average maturity period, and let us say the minimum average maturity period is 5 years. I have actually originally taken an ECB loan for, let's say, 15 years, and now I want to repay all my loan by the 13th year. The lenders normally charge a penal amount or a prepayment charge because you are paying this amount early, and it is disturbing their whole loan schedule. In that case, Reserve Bank said yes, your total prepayment charge cannot exceed 2% over and above your contracted rate, and this payment of prepayment charge or a penal interest would not be counted in the all-in cost ceiling. Then the next question is, as you would have learned in the earlier session, if I have taken a foreign currency ECB and I want to convert it into a rupee ECB, it is possible subject to certain conditions. But conversion of a rupee ECB into a foreign currency ECB is not permitted. A couple of other points what we should consider. One is that you cannot avail an ECB beyond $750 million in a single financial year under the automatic route. And if you want to avail an ECB beyond $750 million in a single financial year, then you basically have to go and approach Reserve Bank. This obviously would not apply to most of the ECB borrowers who would very safely comply with this annual limit. So can I, for instance, borrow 750 million in year one, then 750 million in year two, once again in year three? Answer is yes. This is a per financial year limit. In terms of debt equity ratio, if you are borrowing from a third party lender, then the ECB regulations are not prescribing any debt equity ratio to be maintained. They're merely saying that you will then be governed by your respective regulator. So for example, if I'm an NBFC, I'm borrowing from a foreign lender, then the FEMA regulations are not prescribing any debt equity ratio to be maintained, but that NBFC will have to then look into the NBFC regulations. And depending on the category of NBFCs, there would be certain debt equity ratio, which it will be required to be fulfilled. But however, if I'm raising an ECB from my foreign equity holder, from my parent company, then I have to ensure that the ECB liability to equity ratio is 7:1. So I cannot have a ECB which is more than 7 times the share capital which has been infused by my shareholders. The next question is, can an Indian bank, a financial institution, NBFCs give guarantees, to the overseas lender in respect of the ECB borrowed by the Indian borrower? Answer is no. It is not permitted. So there is no way I can get any banking, any financial institution guarantee to comfort the lender that I would be making good on the ECB payment. So that's a commercial risk which obviously the lender will have to take. Many times what happens is, I would not normally draw down the ECB, because when I say draw down, it's like a OD. I have availed a overdraft from the bank, but I will draw down on the OD only when I actually require it. Once I have drawn down from the ECB, I may still not use it immediately for the required purpose, for the allowed purpose, for the permitted purpose. In that case, the regulations prescribe that if your monies are kept abroad, then this is the way you can temporarily keep. And if your monies are kept in India, then this is the way, how you have to do it. So in terms of ECBs raised for foreign currency expenditure, the regulations permit me to park the amount abroad pending utilization. I can keep it in my foreign bank account. And in the interim period, I can invest that money in the deposits with foreign branches or subsidiaries of the Indian bank. For example, I can keep it with Dubai branch of SBI, saying that, I will use it after 15 days, but give me a 15-day deposit so that I earn some returns on it. Or I can invest in any CODs or other products offered by the banks, or I can invest in any treasury bills, other monetary instruments of 1 year maturity. And let us say if I have raised an ECB for rupee expenditure, which means my end use is in India, then I can't keep the money abroad. I have to immediately repatriate it in India. So it can't happen that I draw down the ECB but keep the funds abroad. No, I have to immediately bring it in India. And if I'm not able to use it immediately, then I can invest in the term deposits of banks, but where the maximum period is not beyond 12 months. And the reason why the regulations put this cap of 12 months, because they want us to utilize this ECB quickly, so that our projects come up quickly and so that we are able to repay them on time. Recently, because of this COVID, where the projects were kept on hold, the Reserve Bank came up with a further extension, and it said that if you have any unutilized ECB proceeds, which is for the purposes of expenditure in India, which is like for rupee expenditure, then you can park that in term deposit for a period up to 1st March 2022. So you're able to keep the money idle for a longer time till you think the situation is normalizing, so that you can now start expending it. So that's a temporary relief which has been given by RBI. One question is investment by registered FPIs in NCDs, are they governed by the ECB regulations? What we are talking about, answer is no. They are governed by a separate debt regulations, which has been issued along with the non-debt regulations, some time back. So the ECB regulations do not govern such NCD investments by FPIs. In the context of refinancing of existing ECB, can I do it? Answer is yes. let's say I've borrowed at 7.5%, I'm getting a better deal. You can absolutely do it. There are a couple of conditions. First condition is there can't be any reduction in the outstanding maturity of the original borrowing. So you can't raise an ECB so as to reduce your MAMP, which is minimum average maturity period. And the other condition is that the cost of the fresh ECB has to obviously be lower than the cost of the existing ECB. Now it could be lower by 0.1%, doesn't matter, but it has to be lower. Can I refinance the ECBs which I had raised under the old ECB framework? That is the ECB framework which was existing before this notification 3 capital R was issued. Answer is yes, it's absolutely permitted. One interesting point, can I convert my ECB into equity? Yes, the government is more than happy because in some sense you are increasing the FDI and decreasing the liability. There are a couple of conditions. One obviously is that the company in which you have lended the rupee ECB, that company should either be under the automatic route under the FDI policy, or if it is not under the automatic route, then you have obtained a government approval for this conversion of ECB into equity. At no point should you be breaching any sectoral cap. You will comply with the pricing guidelines, which means the conversion will obviously happen at a fair market value on the date of conversion. You will do certain reporting compliance. This is just a procedural step. More importantly, you will obtain consent of other lenders. So if I have other domestic lenders, etc., I will need to obtain their consent, saying that this ECB which I had borrowed, I'm converting it into equity, etc. These are some conditions in respect of conversion of ECB into equity. Many times what happens, the lenders say that, see, I'm not allowed to take a guarantee from the Indian banks, so I want you to keep certain assets as collateral. I want the borrower to provide me with some security to create certain charge on certain assets. The question is that, can I as an Indian borrower provide some of my assets in India as security to the overseas lender? Answer is yes. There are a couple of conditions. First is that you can create a charge only on 3 kinds of assets, which is immovable assets, movable assets, and financial securities. Here we frequently face problem on creating charge on intangibles. That's something which I have seen the bankers are not comfortable. So there is a bit of an ambiguity whether an intangible, a trademark which I own and which is very valuable fits under one of these items. I can also give my personal guarantee, like as a shareholder of an Indian borrower, I can give a personal guarantee. I can issue a corporate guarantee. So if, let's say, there is a group whose subsidiary is borrowing these ECBs, the parent company in India can obviously give a corporate guarantee that is permitted. And also the authorized dealers are instructed that they should permit creating the aforesaid security subject to certain other conditions. First, obviously, is the ECB needs to comply with the ECB guidelines, which is given. Second, it's very important that there has to be an existence of a security clause in the loan agreement. So it can't happen that I have borrowed an ECB, a rupee ECB, and after 2 years, I now want to give security to the lender. There has to be a clause in the agreement due to which I am forced to give such a security. Only then the bankers are allowed to create a charge on these assets. And third and most important point, again, there has to be an NOC obtained from the existing lenders in India. And this is logical, because if I have already given certain assets on charge to the domestic lenders should be comfortable if I'm creating any kind of a second charge on those assets, and hence the requirement of getting a no objection certificate. So this is, I would say, the basic framework of ECBs, rupee denominated ECBs. Very quickly now we'll pick up, trade credits. That's the second part of the section. And third, which is the substantive part, is, we'll deal with case studies. So, the first question is, what do you mean by a trade credit? And let's make it simple. There are two kinds of trade credit. One is a supplier's credit. Second is a buyer's credit. What is a supplier's credit? Let's say I am an Indian company. I import goods from, let's say, a USA company. And the USA company says that, okay, I'm giving you a credit of X period. That credit is regarded as a supplier's credit. Now, normally these trade credits are pretty common, but moment they exceed 3 years, then you get covered under ECB, which means if in normal course, a US company is saying, pay me after 1 year, pay me after 18 months, that's something which is not covered. But moment such supplier's credit is exceeding 3 years, then you obviously have to treat this trade credit as a ECB and then comply with the relevant provisions of that. Second category of trade credit is a buyer's credit. A buyer's credit, it refers to loans for payment of imports in India, which is arranged by the importer from overseas bank towards this kind of import. So if, let's say, I as an Indian company, I am importing certain goods, and for the purposes of importing that good, I have gone, let's say, to a lender to say that, give me this credit. I'll take money from you and I will make payment to the concerned, exporter or the US company. That is regarded again as a buyer's credit. So these are the two categories of credits. Again, the credit could be foreign currency denominated trade credit. It could be Indian rupee denominated trade credit, depending on, what is my obligation. Is my obligation to pay in Indian rupee, or is my obligation to pay in foreign currency? Accordingly, it will be characterized as that. Let's very quickly go through, the framework for a foreign currency denominated trade credit. And more or less, the rupee denominated trade credit is more or less, same, with some very, very minor exceptions. So here again, the currency of borrowing could be any freely convertible foreign currency. Somebody, had asked a query, can I, borrow in Bitcoin? Sorry, Bitcoin is not a foreign currency at all. It has to be a legitimate fiat currency of a country. What are the forms of a foreign currency denominated TC? They're either supplier's credit or they are buyer's credit. Who is the eligible borrower? This is the most important point. And there is only one category of eligible borrower permitted here, which is basically person resident in India acting as an importer. You are importing goods, and against these goods, you are getting this trade credit. There is no other eligible borrower which are permitted under the TC regulations. What is the amount of trade credit which is permitted under automatic route? If I am an oil company, gas refining company, airline company, shipping company, then my per import transaction can be up to 150 million. But if I'm any other company, let's say I'm a normal manufacturing company, then my import transaction cannot exceed 50 million, on which I'm availing trade credit. This is obviously per import transaction. I can keep on, doing multiple such import transactions. Who is a recognized lender? Clearly, for supplier's credit, the recognized lender can only be one, which is the supplier himself, who has given me this extended credit. For the purposes of buyer's credit, the list is slightly wider. It is the banks, financial institutions, foreign equity holder, also financial institutions located in IFSC, which is the GIFT City, and obviously foreign branches and subsidiaries of Indian banks. It is important that if there are any Indian banks, NBFCs, which are operating from IFSC, then you need to comply with the relevant GIFT guidelines, issued by the Reserve Bank of India per se. So there is a limited list of institutions which fall under the buyer's credit list. What is the all-in cost ceiling, per annum? Earlier, it was 6 months LIBOR plus 2.5% or 250 BPS spread. This has changed because the whole concept of LIBOR is now being done away with globally. So now the new benchmark rate, as per the circular issued on 8th December 2021, just a couple of days back, the Reserve Bank has said that your benchmark rate will be any widely accepted interbank rate or alternative reference rate, ARR, of 6-month tenor. We are expecting more information on this from the bank. And the change in all-in cost ceiling has been increased from 2.5% to 3%. And there is some kind of a one-time adjustment of benchmark plus 3.5% given. This is a recent regulation. There are talks of LIBOR being replaced by TINA and other such alternate reference rate, but I think we'll get more information in the coming days. What is the period of trade credit for import of capital goods? It's up to 3 years from the date of shipment. And for import of non-capital goods, it's up to 1 year from the date of shipment or operating cycle, whichever is less. What is the change of currency of borrowing? Change of currency of TC from one foreign currency to another foreign currency is permitted per se. So you have taken a trade credit in dollar. You now want to shift it to pounds. Answer is yes. It's absolutely permitted in that sense. What is the exchange rate? Again, the exchange rate for conversion of foreign trade credit to a rupee trade credit, you have to apply the exchange rate, which is either the exchange rate on the date of the agreement or an exchange rate which is less than the exchange rate on the date of the agreement, effectively. For hedging, they are basically saying that you have to have your own risk management policy and you have to follow hedging guidelines, if any, by the sectoral regulation. The TC regulations, which is the trade credit regulations, are not dealing specifically with the hedging guidelines. Now let's come to the Indian rupee denominated trade credit. If you look at it, it's more or less the same. There are only minor variations. Look at point 5. Who is the recognized lender? All the lenders which were covered in the foreign currency denominated trade credit are the recognized lender. However, foreign branches and foreign subsidiaries of Indian banks are excluded from the recognized lender. That's the first change. All-in cost ceiling, obviously, the benchmark rate is the Government of India securities. And all this new LIBOR being replaced by a new reference rate, that is something which is not applicable to rupee denominated trade credit. So it continues to be 2.5% plus the benchmark rate applicable on government securities of a corresponding period. Can you change your INR trade credit to a foreign currency trade credit? Answer is no. Foreign currency to rupee change is permitted. A rupee to foreign currency is not permitted. So this is similar to what we have seen vis-a-vis the ECB regulations. In terms of hedging, again, overseas investors, because overseas investors would be giving you a trade credit in rupees, so they obviously would be concerned about hedging. So similar to ECB, the same regulations apply, where an overseas investor can hedge their exposure, through permitted derivative products with the Indian banks, or they can access the domestic market through the branches, the foreign branches and subsidiaries of Indian bank, and have a back-to-back basis hedging product. Certain key points. What is the security for trade credit? So unlike ECBs, where bank guarantees were not possible, this is a distinct change. The bank can give a bank guarantee in favor of the overseas lender, not exceeding obviously the amount of trade credit. And you can also get a bank guarantee by the foreign banks or by the overseas branches of the Indian bank. So if you want to go to a Citibank Singapore to get a bank guarantee, please go ahead. Obviously, the period cannot exceed the period permissible for the trade credit. And so this is obviously a huge relaxation compared to an ECB. Again, in the context of security, can an importer offer security of movable assets, immovable assets, and corporate or personal guarantee? That seems to be possible. There are certain specific exclusions made, interestingly. For example, in context of immovable assets, you cannot have SEZ lend provided as a security. In context of movable assets, there is a clarification that yes, you can also provide financial asset as a security. In my view, a financial asset, though not expressly mentioned in the ECB, is something also which can be provided in the context of ECB. Then it is interesting, if there is an SEZ, free trade warehousing zone, DTA, there are certain specific regulations. The regulation says that a trade credit can be raised by a unit or a developer in SEZ, including a free trade warehousing zone for purchase of non-capital and capital goods within an SEZ or from a different SEZ. So you have the importer and the exporter in the same SEZ. You obviously can have a trade credit. Also, it says that an entity in DTA, which is like a normal domestic tariff area, like a non-SEZ, is also allowed to raise a trade credit for purchase of capital, non-capital goods from an SEZ unit. So that again is interesting. It is not necessary that you need to always import goods, from a foreign exporter. And obviously, all these transactions, have to be in compliance with the SEZ Act and the SEZ regulations per se. There are certain reporting requirements, whether you have availed ECB or you have availed a trade credit. I think these, apply, to both of them. So there is a monthly reporting in the form TC, as we call it, and there is a quarterly reporting, which needs to be made. So this is common for ECBs as well as, quarterly reporting. I just want to touch upon certain key changes in the old framework and the new framework, in the context of trade credit. So earlier, the old framework talked about a cap of 20 million per import transaction. You could not have a trade credit arrangement of any import transaction exceeding 20 million. This obviously has been increased to 50 million. So more transactions get covered under the trade credit regulations. Also in case of certain sectors, which is the oil and gas companies, the downstream and the upstream and the midstream companies, as we call it, and the airline and shipping companies, this is further increased to 150 million, which is a significant jump as compared to what was earlier allowed. If you look at the recognized lenders, there is an addition of 2 new lenders. One is a foreign equity holder can also give a trade credit, and also you have a financial institutions in IFSC, which can give a trade credit. And you would notice that the minimum average maturity period concept doesn't apply to trade credit. So it's obviously are far more relaxed compared to the ECB regulations. If you look at the all-in cost ceiling, interestingly, the all-in cost ceiling has been reduced. Earlier, you had a 6-month LIBOR plus 350 basis point. This has now changed to 6-month LIBOR plus 250. And obviously, as we discussed earlier, this 250 basis point has been changed to 300 basis point. What is that all-in reference rate? That is something which Reserve Bank will announce in some time. If you look at the period of trade credit, that has been reduced from 5 years to 3 years. If you look at the period of trade credit for import of non-capital goods, earlier it was 1 year from the date of shipment. Now they are saying 1 year from the date of shipment or operating cycle, whichever is less. So obviously this has been, I would say, made far more stringent. There was no specific provision in relation to trade credit beyond the above period. There was always an ambiguity. The new framework specifically says that any trade credit beyond 3 years would be treated as an ECB. And obviously any trade credit up to 3 years, you can fit under the trade credit framework regulations, because these regulations are far more relaxed compared to the ECB regulations. I gave one example. The concept of MAMP doesn't apply to a trade credit. I think with this, we have kind of spent an hour, and maybe we have an hour more. What we'll do, we'll get into the case studies. We have some almost 35 slides on the case studies, and let's look at some of the provisions around it. So this is the first case study. I think it's a relatively simple case study. You have an Indian company which is an eligible borrower. You have a foreign company which is a recognized lender, and the foreign company has given an ECB of $150 million under the old ECB regulations. The minimum average maturity period under the old regulations was 5 years. Now, as you are aware, new regulations have created far more relaxed MAMP conditions compared to what it was earlier. Under the new regulations, now the minimum average maturity period is 3 years. Now, can the Indian company now actually wants to repay that loan in such a way where the MAMP would be, let's say, 4 years? Can one say that new regulations have come in and now I can apply the new MAMP of 3 years, and which means I can actually repay my loan before 5 years? Answer is no, that is not permitted. This specific ECB was availed under the old regulations where there was a commitment that my payment period will commensurate with a 5-year minimum average maturity period. You cannot take a view now under the new regulations that I can repay it earlier. At the most, you'll have to maybe approach your banker, request them to get a specific approval from RBI that now, considering the new regulations, allow me to repay it in a faster manner. I have not seen any such approvals granted, so it's a question mark whether you will be able to apply the new MAMP under the current regulations. Let's look at case study 2. So it's an interesting case study. You have an Indian company which raised a ECB of 100 million from the foreign company. At that time, the foreign company was not a recognized equity lender, which means it was not my parent company. It was not holding any equity shares in me. And therefore, when I raised the ECB, the minimum average maturity period applicable was 10 years. And I had raised this ECB for the purposes of general corporate purpose. And obviously, I was unrelated at that point of time. After 3 years, for some reason, the foreign company decides to acquire 51% of my share. It obviously becomes a recognized foreign equity holder. And if now I were to avail a ECB from the foreign company, my MAMP would not have been 10 years. It would have actually been 5 years. Again, the question is that can I now take a view that I had taken a loan at that point of time, the MAMP period was 10 years. After 3 years, this has now become my foreign equity parent company because it is holding 51%. And hence, I should now apply the MAMP of 5 years. Again, in my view, this doesn't seem possible. You obviously have to go and take a special approval from Reserve Bank. But under the automatic route, you cannot reduce your minimum average maturity period from 10 to 5 years merely because your foreign lender has now become your parent company and a permitted foreign equity holder. Let's go to case study 3. So this is interesting. It's absolutely reverse of what we discussed earlier. So here, when I availed the loan, the foreign company was actually my parent company. It was holding 51%. And therefore, I had raised an ECB, of 100 million from the foreign company for a general corporate purpose. And of course, my MAMP was 5 years. Now, after 3 years, the foreign company actually wants to sell this shares, let's say, to some other strategic buyer. The question is that, can the foreign company actually sell this share to a foreign buyer? There is an RBI FAQ number 8. The RBI FAQ say that the ECB guidelines, including the minimum equity holding, need to be fulfilled during the complete tenure of the ECB and not just at the time of availing the ECB. So I don't need to satisfy this 51% holding merely when this loan was given. I need to satisfy it all throughout. So till this loan is repaid, technically I cannot sell my shareholding. And for this, I need to go and take a specific dispensation from Reserve Bank. I do understand in one or two cases such approvals have been granted, but I have to convince RBI that, while I did availed it under the old regulations when I was a parent company and my MAMP was 5 years, allow me to sell my shares. And one of the condition which the RBI is likely to impose is a higher MAMP, and only then it is likely to allow you to sell. But this was an interesting case, which proved that sometimes giving a ECB under a specific route where I need to be the equity holder for, let's say, a period of 5 years, or whatever be that period, till I satisfy the MAMP condition, I actually cannot even sell my shareholding, which could be a deterrent for a future transaction. Let's take this case study 4, and this is a very simple case study, gives a concept of MAMP. See, here I've taken ECB from my parent company for a period of for general corporate purpose, where my MAMP is 5 years. The question is, can I start my repayment of principal before 5 years? You can obviously start your repayment of principal before 5 years, but your overall payment of the complete loan should be such that you complete a minimum average maturity of 5 years. And this is a very simple calculation what we have done. Column 1 talks about the date of drawal or the date of repayment. Column 2 is what is the amount of drawal. Column 3 talks about what is the amount of repayment. Column 4 talks about what is the balance loan. Column 5 says what was the number of days balance with the borrower, and then you compute column 6 in a certain formula. And in this case, while I've started repaying the loan on a regular basis, when I look at the total repayment, my average maturity period is coming to 3.2 years. So it obviously is not satisfying the 5-year average maturity period. So first clarification, can I start repaying my principal, let's say, after a couple of months as soon as I avail it? Answer is yes. But then you have to compute your total repayment schedule, the amount, the number of days balance, and accordingly you will then compute your MAMP and just check whether you are fitting under the 5-year compliance or not. So this is just one example where it brings home the point that you need to be very, very sure about your repayment schedule does not violate the MAMP condition per se. So this is obviously an FAQ 14, which I just clarified. Let's go to case study number 5. This is again pretty interesting. It is like, how do you sometimes compute the indirect interest? So look at this structure. You have a foreign company 1 holding 90% in foreign company 2. You have a foreign company 2 holding 80% in foreign company 3. You have a foreign company 3 holding, let's say, 70% in Indian company 1. And the Indian company has a wholly owned subsidiary, which is Indian company 2. Now, the facts are as under. And what are the issues? The issue is that, can ICO 1 raise a loan from FCO 1, FCO 2, FCO 3? Similarly, can ICO 2 raise a loan from, let's say, FCO 3? As I earlier mentioned, either you need to have a direct equity holding of 25%, or you need to have an indirect equity holding of 51%. So first, let's look at FCO 3. FCO 3 is holding 70% in ICO 1. Can you give a loan from FCO 3 to ICO 1 ECB? Answer is yes. It is exceeding the 25% requirement of a direct holding. Now let's go to the next question. Can FCO2 give an ECB to ICO1? In this case, FCO2 has to indirectly hold 51% in ICO1. Now, how do we compute 51%? There are two ways to do it. One, which is a bit of an aggressive way, to say that because FCO2 is holding more than 50% in FCO3, which is 80%, FCO2 is controlling FCO3. And because FCO2 is controlling FCO3, FCO3 obviously is holding 70%. So it should be regarded as I am satisfying the 51% criteria, right? If you apply the same logic, even FCO1 will qualify, because FCO1 is controlling FCO2 and FCO2 is controlling FCO3. So one would say that indirectly, FCO1 is holding 70% in ICO1. Now that's approach number one. The approach number two is that you don't look at the control aspect. You merely multiply. For example, if you say that FCO2 holds 80% of 70%, what is the number? The number there is 56%. So FCO2 under a percentage formula holds effectively 56% in ICO1. It is still satisfying the 51% criteria. So clearly FCO2 can give the ECB loan. But if I look at the effective percentage held by FCO1 under the percentage method, I have to say 90% of 80% and whatever that number comes into 70%. That number comes to 50.4, which is slightly less than 51%. So under the percentage basis, I'm not eligible, interestingly, to give an ECB to ICO1. The conservative method is that go by the percentage method. But if you go by the percentage method in this case, then FCO1 is not eligible. And I think this is a fit case to go to the authorized dealer, tell them that the intention of the circular is effectively whether FCO1 is controlling ICO1 or not. And in the facts of the current case, FCO1 is definitely controlling ICO1 because FCO1 is controlling all the intermediate entities, which are FCO2 and FCO3. So I clearly control more than 51% of ICO1. But if I go by the percentage method, 90% of 80% into 70%, my mathematical answer is below 51%, due to which FCO1 may not be eligible to give an ECB. So that's a very interesting scenario. I thought I'll bring few calculations here. And today we have no clarity whether the control method needs to be followed in determining the indirect 51%, or we need to follow the proportionate method or the percentage method, as we call it, to determine the indirect 51%. The same answers will be applicable to ICO2 because ICO2 effectively is held 100% by ICO1. So the same methodology you will apply when you are testing ICO2, under which, in my view, you will come to a conclusion that under all methods, FCO2 and 3 are eligible, and FCO1 is eligible only under the control method to give an ECB to ICO2. With this, I think let's go to case study 6. This is again interesting, but I would say relatively simple. I have FCO1 holding 100%. FCO1 again has a 100% subsidiary, which is FCO2. And the question is, can FCO2, which is not holding anything, any shareholding in ICO1, can FCO2 give me an ECB? Answer seems to be yes, because if you look at the category of foreign equity holder, there are 3 categories. One is a direct equity of 25%. Second is an indirect equity of 51%. And third category is group company with common overseas parent. So while FCO2 does not hold any direct equity in ICO1, FCO2 and ICO have a common parent, which is FCO1. And in that context, it should satisfy the foreign equity holder definition. Let's bring a small variance to this case study, and let us have FCO3 in between. And again, the question is, can FCO2 give a loan to ICO? Again, in my view, the answer should not change because the ultimate parent of ICO is FCO1, and FCO1 is also the parent of FCO2. So a better view seems to be yes. You should be able to give an ECB, and obviously with all FEMA matters, your authorized dealer is your god. You have to, get it in writing from them that you agree with they agree with your interpretation, so that there are no other consequences in future. But I think it looks like I should be allowed to look at the ultimate, parent company, and in which case FCO2 should be allowed to give an ECB to the ICO. Okay, let's go to case study 7. This is interesting, again, a real life case study. So you have FCO as a recognized lender intending to give an ECB to ICO. And what ICO intends to do is it intends to, let's say, set up a factory unit, for which, if you look at the real estate definition, it excluded any industrial project. The question is that the way I will do it is that I will first avail an ECB. With that ECB, I will buy an agricultural land. After buying an agricultural land, I will convert it into a non-agricultural land to be used for industrial purpose. And the question is that, can I use the proceeds of ECB to buy what you call, the industrial land? That's a very practical, question. I think when we were discussing with the bankers, and they would have done some informal discussions with Reserve Bank, we were directed to come for a specific approval. And of course, the Reserve Bank had lot of reservations over we buying an agricultural land, which will later be converted into industrial land, etc. It seems like at a ground level, you may not be able to argue that utilization of the ECB proceeds for purchase of an agricultural land, which you will later convert into an industrial land for the purpose of setting up a new project, is permitted under the ECB regulations. So I think in this case, you might have no choice but to go to your authorized dealer for consultations. And there is a good probability they may direct you to, write to RBI for a specific approval. This might be difficult under the automatic route, especially moment you have an agricultural land involved. Okay, let's go to case study 8. It's a simple case study. I am an NRI. I want to kind of invest in the NCDs of the ICO. Do the current ECB regulations, permit me? And the old regulations permitted me, subject to certain conditions. But if you look at the new regulation, notification 3R, interestingly, there is no such provisions allowing an Indian company to issue NCD to NRIs or persons of Indian origins. So it seems that it may not be possible to avail such NCDs from NRIs under the current ECB regulations. But interestingly, there is a separate regulation which is called FEMA deposit regulations. And under the deposit regulations, an NRI can invest in the deposit of an Indian company subject to certain conditions. The distinction here is that it has to be a deposit. It cannot be a debenture. So moment it's a debenture, you will fall under the FEMA ECB regulations. Moment it's a deposit, like a loan, it will not form under the ECB regulations, and you will cover it under the FEMA deposit regulations, where under certain circumstances, you are allowed to get deposits from NRIs. Okay, let's look at certain case studies, for end use requirement. So let's say you have ICO. ICO intends to raise the ECB from its overseas holding company. ICO intends to onward lend the said amount to its subsidiary, and the subsidiary would repay the loan amount. And the question is, can ICO raise the ECB for onward lending? It's pretty interesting, because if ICO had to raise ECB for repayment of its own existing rupee loan, yes, it was permitted under the permitted end use, where of course the MAMP had to be 10 years. Also, if ICO was an NBFC, ICO could on-lend it to any person, but here ICO is not an NBFC. Can ICO argue that effectively the ultimate end use is repayment of rupee loans? So I should be eligible to raise the ECB, on-lend it to my subsidiary, which will then kind of repay the rupee loan. I think this practically seems to be a challenge. I think the bankers are not comfortable, it seems. The bankers would either come back to say that go to RBI for a specific approval, or let ESCO avail the ECB directly, because if ESCO is availing the ECB directly, ESCO can definitely use it for repayment of the rupee loan, in which case an ICO can become, or give a corporate guarantee to the FCO. That could be some structuring which can be done. But ICO obtaining the ECB, doing an on-lending is something which might be prohibited. And what it means is that, do you look at the proximate purpose or do you look at the ultimate purpose? That again is a very interesting view. You go to certain law firms, they say, no, you look at the ultimate purpose. You go to the authorized dealer, they're always concerned with the proximate purpose. So there is a bit of a, I would say, a fundamental debate here, that don't we look at the spirit of the regulations? The spirit of the regulations want you to use the amount, in a particular manner. Yes, if you take that school of thought, then on-lending by ICO should be permitted. I know of, couple of companies which have taken that stand, where bankers have not really either understood or they have not objected. But if a banker were to get into detail, I think there could be a challenge. They might look at the proximate purpose, saying that on-lending is not permitted, and you might have to get the ECB directly into your subsidiary or go to RBI for a specific approval. So this case study obviously talks about this real dilemma of proximate versus ultimate end use in real world. Okay, let's go to case study 10, and we have around 14-15 case studies. So yeah, some 5 case studies are left. Let's look at this. So this is on the quantum. As I earlier mentioned, in a single financial year, you cannot avail ECB beyond 750 million. So we had this case where in year 1, somebody had raised 80 million. In year 2, they had raised 720. But in year 2 also, the earlier ECB which was raised was proposed to be refinanced. So the question is, in year 2, if I am also refinancing my earlier ECB of 80 million, can somebody say that in all, in year 2, you are raising 800 million USD ECB, which is above the permissible limit of 750 million USD? I think, yes, there is a lot of ambiguity. Fortunately, the recent RBI FAQ 17, it actually clarifies that for the purpose of computing 750 million, we can ignore the refinancing of the ECB amount. So going by that FAQ, if you are raising 720 and you are refinancing 80, then you don't have to count 80 for the purpose of determining whether or not the cap of USD 750 million has been breached. So to that extent, yes, I think it's a welcome FAQ by the RBI on this. This is the FAQ which I was referring to. Let's go to case study 11. This is interesting. When this notification had come 3R somewhere in 2019, I remember I giving one presentation in one forum where I actually felt that now LLPs are possibly allowed to raise ECBs, because the eligible borrower said all entities eligible to receive FDI. And in some sense, we know that FDI in LLP kind of is possible. I'm not talking literally, but in a policy sense. But interestingly, FAQ, RBI later came with an FAQ after a couple of months, and their interpretation was very interesting. They said, see, FDI is defined to mean equity instruments in an Indian company. Whereas you don't have an FDI in LLP, you have a foreign investment in LLP. So that was a very interesting interpretation they made. And they therefore said, okay, we believe there cannot be an FDI in LLP. There can only be a foreign investment in an LLP. And hence LLPs are not eligible to receive FDI, and hence they cannot raise ECBs. So obviously the RBI FAQ, closed any avenue of an Indian LLP eligible to raise ECBs. Let's go to a very interesting case study, which incidentally happened in Ahmedabad. We had an Indian company had availed an ECB, and for certain purposes, especially for tax purposes, we wanted to convert that Indian company into an LLP. You obviously cannot avail the ECB into an LLP. So we went to Reserve Bank, saying that when this ECB was availed, this was an Indian company. Now, for a variety of reasons, we want to convert it into an LLP. You kindly allow us to retain this ECB into the LLP, and we will comply with whatever ECB regulations were there. And we got a very interesting RBI letter, which basically said that when you availed the ECB, you were a company. You thereafter got converted into an LLP. So we are perfectly fine in this ECB continuing into this LLP, and it should not be regarded as a violation of the ECB regulations, which do not permit LLPs to raise ECB. So that was pretty interesting letter, which one of the Ahmedabad company obtained. So yes, it means that a conversion from an Indian company to an LLP, where the Indian company has an ECB, seems to be possible with obviously an appropriate RBI letter on record. I don't think we should do it without an RBI letter on record. So that was one interesting case study, which we faced a couple of years back. Let's go to case study 13. So I think it's interesting. It's a very simple case study. It's like, I have, let's say I've availed an ECB, and the minimum average maturity period is 3 years. Can I convert my ECB into equity shares before 3 years? I don't want to, I'm not allowed to prepay it, and I don't want to wait for 3 years, after which I will convert it into equity shares. Answer is yes. If you look at the master directions of ECB, I think the wordings appropriately, support that conversion of ECB, including those which are matured but unpaid. And the wordings including those which are matured should hopefully mean that even if certain ECBs are not matured for payment, you may still be able to convert it into equity. This is obviously subject to, a couple of conditions, what we discussed earlier. So this conversion before your MAMP seems to be possible. I think let's come to the last case study before we get into a couple of FAQs from RBI. So you have this Indian company which has availed ECB from a recognized lender. You have a foreign company which has provided a corporate guarantee in favor of the recognized lender. So let's say I'm a Indian company, my parent company is a US company. I availed a ECB, let's say from HSBC London, and HSBC London got a guarantee from my US parent company, which obviously is not prohibited under the current ECB regulations. And for some reason, I was unable to pay my ECB on time. So the HSBC London triggered the guarantee, and it recovered that amount from the foreign company. Effectively, what it meant was that my guarantor became my lender. So today my lender is HSBC London, but after HSBC London recovered that money from the US company, it's actually now my US company, which is a lender in my books. And the whole question is that now what happens to this outstanding, which I need to pay to the US company? Do I need to execute any fresh ECB agreement? Do I need to make any fresh filings? And to be very honest, there are no such guidelines available under the ECB regulations. We went to the banker and we asked them that, do I need to file any forms? Is this outstanding loan treated as an ECB? And I don't think they had an answer. Effectively, the conclusion we came was that we don't necessarily need to show it as an ECB, but any payment I make, back to the US company, which is my parent company, towards this trigger of guarantee, I may need to go back and take my RBI's consent to allow for this payment, because they effectively paid on my behalf, whenever my ECBs were dues. So that seemed to be the practical approach under the ECB regulations. This is the rarest of rare case where I'm not able to repay my ECB and my guarantor overseas is required to pay on my behalf, and who then steps into the shoes of the lender, etc. I think with this, the case studies portion conclude, and let's look at a couple of important FAQs of RBI. First is, does all-in cost ceiling apply on a continuous basis, or can it be calculated even on a average basis? The answer is no. You have to have an all-in cost absolutely on a continuous basis. It cannot happen that the first year all-in cost is higher and the second year all-in cost is lower, etc. So as to breach. So let's say you come to an all-in cost of 7.5%, which means your loan cannot exceed 7.5%. You cannot have a term where in the first year you are paying 6.5 and then you are permitted to pay 8.5 in the second year to compensate for that. So that's what the RBI is clarifying. The second FAQ is that, is the reimbursement of expenditure incurred in the past a permissible end use? That's a very important clarification. I'll give you an example what it means. Let's say my permitted end use is a capital expenditure, right? And there used to be a case where I've already incurred that capital expenditure, and now I need to really get an ECB so that I can kind of manage the funding what I did for that capital expenditure. The RBI says, sorry, you can't say that this is for the purposes of capital expenditure. Then this is for the purposes of repayment of rupee loan, what you have incurred to kind of make the capital expenditure earlier. So earlier there were some interpretations that I will fit under the capital expenditure basket merely because this loan in India, I temporarily took it to kind of make that expenditure. So RBI says no, just look at the purpose for which you are applying this ECB per se. So that's an interesting clarification. It wasn't there a couple of years back. One more clarification to say that, can ECB be availed for making equity investment domestically? As I earlier mentioned, there is an FAQ which permits an equity investment overseas or for buying goodwill. The answer is no. You cannot make an equity investment either directly or indirectly through purchase of goodwill. That's not permitted. Let's go for another FAQ. Can I make an ECB for making a contribution in an LLP? This is interesting because in one sense, what is permitted is, what is prohibited is an equity investment. So if I'm forming an LLP and I'm putting it into the capital, can I argue that this is not an equity investment? This is actually a partner's contribution. Somehow the RBI FAQ says, no, you can't do it. For the wordings don't really support what RBI is saying, but FEMA being an administered law, you just comply with whatever is there in the FAQ. The next question, which is FAQ 27, is exactly what I earlier mentioned, that yes, there is fortunately a clarification that ECB proceeds can be utilized for overseas investment. So this whole restriction of making an equity investment, this prohibition is only for domestic investment, not for an overseas investment. One more FAQ is, can ECB be raised under the earlier ECB framework? Can I refinance that under the current ECB framework? Answer is yes, right? So it does not matter that my ECB was raised under the old regulations. I can still refinance it under the current new regulations, which is the 3 capital R regulation. and I will comply with whatever condition is available. Let's look at the last FAQ. Can the interest accrued on ECB, can it also be converted into equity shares? Answer is yes. There was a bit of an ambiguity that is it only the principal which will get converted into equity share, or can I even convert the accrued interest? And FAQ very rightly said that no problem. You can even convert your accrued interest into equity, subject to the conversion regulations, which were discussed earlier. So I think with this, I think we have come to the end of this chat. I think I'll stop the screen sharing, and I think we have some questions. I believe Manisha Bain for Q&A.
Thank you, sir.
So I have two questions in the chat box very quickly. Let me take it up. Is it okay, Keshav?
Yes, sir. I was
I
just
think
reading it out
yeah.
for you.
Yeah. Okay. So the first question is for import of raw materials period beyond 1 year. Will it be treated as an ECB? If the period is beyond 3 years, it is treated as an ECB. If the period is below 3 years, it is not treated as an ECB. You will then try to fit it under the trade credit part of ECB, which is a far more relaxed portion. The next question is, in case the reimbursement of expenses are not paid till 4 years, will it be treated as ECB or trade credit? I don't know what it means, because typically a reimbursement of expense doesn't fall under clearly a trade credit, because a trade credit only talks about an importer importing goods, not necessarily a reimbursement. The question is that if I have created a liability which I need to pay to somebody else, is that something which is treated as an ECB? I think my view is not necessarily an ECB, but this could still be treated as a capital account transaction, which is not necessarily permitted under the automatic route. Because what it means is that any liability I create to repay, that needs to fit somewhere. And I'll give you a classic example. If let's say there is an employee seconded from the overseas branch to me in the Indian company, and under my agreement, I need to reimburse the expenditure to the overseas company, and overseas company is making certain payments on my behalf. There is a view that that itself is a capital account transaction for which you require a specific approval. Today, as a matter of practice, it is happening. But now if this reimbursement itself is not being paid and it is kept outstanding, then at some stage you'll have to go for a specific approval to dispose it of. This is not necessarily an ECB. The next interesting question is, when they say trade credit on import of non-capital goods, does it include services? Yes, it could. You might be a service company, but which is importing non-capital goods. The important point is that whether you are a manufacturing company or a service company, it has to be an import of goods. So it does not matter that you are in the service sector. Why is there a distinction between deposit and debentures? The real logic, I honestly don't know the logic. It's a very good question, but a deposit seems to be covered under the deposit regulation, which seems to permit an NRI putting a deposit. They have not changed that regulation, whereas in ECB they are not touching deposit, which interestingly in the old regulations they had permitted investment of debenture by an NRI, which they removed it. Also legally under the Companies Act, a debenture is regarded as a security. It does not normally come under the deposit regulations. There are some exclusions, whereas a simple loan, typically you will not say it's a security. So there also seems to be some legal distinction between a debenture and a deposit. And in FEMA, because there are two specific regulations, it seems to be pretty clear. But I agree with you. I don't really know why they have not allowed a debenture, but they have allowed a deposit. Is it permitted to knock off trade credit received versus amount payable to the same party? I don't know whether they have changed it. Sorry, I will need to look at it. But as a concept, set-offs are not permitted. But whether set off from the same party is allowed or not, I really don't remember. I will need to look at the master circular on export or import of goods and services. One will have to look whether there is a specific permission available. But as a thumb rule, you cannot, under the automatic route, set off one payable against another receivable, even though it's from the same party. You need some specific leeway under the regulations. Post receipt of LRN, is it a violation if the amount of ECB is received from a foreign group company instead of the foreign lender? Answer is yes, because you will receive an LRN basis a particular stipulation as to who is your lender. And if your lender changes, obviously you have to go back and carry out the procedure once again per se. So it cannot be from any group company. You will be sharing the names, etc. So yes, I think you'll have to kind of get another LRN if suddenly the lender changes. What if it is from the same foreign group company? I think one more question for import of raw materials period beyond 1 year will be treated as ECB. I think I responded back. It's only beyond 3 years that is treated as ECB. The next question is leasing of property beyond the period of 5 years is not considered as real estate activity, and less than 5 years falls under the real estate activity. I'm just checking the definition, and apparently there is no such period of 5 year. Moment it's a leasing, from the perspective of ECB, it is regarded as a real estate activity. So I think prima facie, my view is that it does not matter what is your period of real estate activity of leasing. Moment it's a leasing of property, it seems to be fitting into the real estate definition under the ECB regulations, which could be prohibited. Let me also check the master circular. Is there a period? And I'm looking at para 1.16 of the master direction. There is no such period of 5 years. So doesn't seem to be the case. Okay. There is one more question. It says, is compounding applicable if the expense liability is not converted to trade credit after 3 years of non-payment? And obviously, as I mentioned, trade credit refers to import of goods. So when we talk about expense liability, I'm presuming that we are talking about expense in relation to import of goods. Yes, answer is yes. If you have violated any such trade credit and you're not fitting it into the regulations, then you might have to go for compounding. So I think that's the general answer. Okay, I don't think we have any further questions. Yes.
A few more queries, sir.
Sure.
So whether deemed ECB is applicable to each class of persons, meaning thereby to proprietorship, partnership, LLPs, and direct ECB is not allowed for these class of persons?
Yes. So see, what happens is there is nothing like a deemed ECB. It effectively means that a proprietor cannot get an ECB. The only exception is if you look at the definition, a unit in SEZ can avail an ECB. So you can have a scenario where you are a proprietor, where you have a unit in SEZ, and your unit is availing that ECB per se. But other than that, a proprietor, etc., they just cannot avail ECB. So it would be a FEMA violation effectively, if by any reason you avail any such ECB.
Further, whether we need to have MAMP related clause in ECB agreement?
So as a standard practice, it is always there. There is always a repayment schedule, number one. The repayment schedule also sometimes has a computation, but even if as to what is the MAMP, but even if the MAMP computation is not there, basis the repayment schedule, one can always calculate the MAMP to really determine whether or not it is fitting into the MAMP condition per se. So I think there are some agreements, it just talks about repayment schedule, and then you'll have to calculate what is the real MAMP coming. You just put it into a predefined Excel file and you'll compute it. Many times the agreement itself says that this is the repayment schedule, the MAMP is, let's say, 5.4 years, and hence it is complying with so and so. The letter is more preferable. We always advise, always good to compute the MAMP and put it in that agreement. But there is no hard and fast rule. It's not sacrosanct.
We have received one more query, sir. Can a parent company or an associate repay the ECB on behalf of the subsidiary?
See, if that parent company or associate is a non-resident, then under Section 3 of FEMA, it is not permissible for a non-resident to make any payment on behalf of a resident. So if an Indian entity has availed an ECB and you have one of its foreign parent company repaying it, that is not possible. If that foreign parent or associate is in India, obviously it will first lend to the Indian company, which will then repay it per se. So I don't think it will ever directly give. So these scenarios are more applicable to cases where you have a foreign parent or a foreign associate. But you cannot have a payment by them if ultimately it is creating a liability in the Indian books. But if, let us say, the foreign parent says, I'm repaying your ECB and you don't have to pay me anything, right? I'm just as a whatever, I'm just taking over your liability. I think in that case, we have seen authorized dealers allowing it. We had one case a couple of months back where the Indian company had received some kind of a ECB from a Japanese company. The Japanese company was then kind of, separating out from the Indian company. So we wrote to the authorized dealer that these payments are no longer payable. There is some other company which is taking it over, and finally the authorized dealer allowed it first. But yes, if such a payment on my behalf is also creating another liability for me, then that is something which apparently may not be permitted without a specific RBI approval.
Right. So last one, whether unpaid costs on ECBs can be converted to ECB?
Unpaid cost on ECBs cannot be converted to ECB.
Okay.
Yes, there is no such provision, so you will not be able to convert it.
Right.
Technically without an RBI approval. Yeah.
Perfect. We have received one more. Can Ultimate Holding Company in the India provide CG to foreign lender?
Yes, a corporate guarantee is possible. Where an Indian parent company, let's say one of the subsidiary has availed an ECB, an Indian company can obviously give a corporate guarantee to the foreign lender. That is pretty common.
Indian company has a subsidiary in US. It imports services from such subsidiary, but dues are unpaid for more than 3 years. Will this become ECB, and is this permitted?
I think that's a very good question, and that's a very common scenario. In practice, what we have seen is you don't normally treat it as an ECB. While theoretically it becomes an ECB, you'll keep on getting extensions from the bank saying that I do not have the monies to make such a payment, etc. So you'll keep on writing to the bank, and the banks will keep on giving you extensions saying that, okay, delay the payment. But yes, theoretically, if you don't write for such extensions, this obviously becomes an ECB which you have technically violated. But I would hardly see any company not going and getting such an extension.
Looks like, sir, all the queries are resolved. Okay, excellent. Thank you, sir. Thank you for such an enriching session on ECBs. We have received, okay, thanking note from most of the participants. Sir, now I would like to thank on the behalf of each and every participant, as well as on the behalf of Ahmedabad branch to you, sir. It was such an enriching session of ECBs denominated in Indian currencies, along with so much of case studies, which were basically on practical aspects. And that's what we love about you, sir, that you not only share the academic knowledge for the law, you also share the practical difficulties and more. You had even shared your personal experiences for betterment of each and every participant in the fraternity. With this note, sir, I would like to have a virtual applause for you, sir, and would like to thank you and your team who helped you in preparation of this presentation. On behalf of each and every participant, and on behalf of Ahmedabad branch, sir. Thanks a lot, sir. Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks, Keshav.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks, the Institute. Thank you.